I moved into our suburban neighborhood about 5 years ago, mostly drawn by the promise of a quiet life away from the city's constant hustle. My place sits about halfway down a gently curved street lined with almost identical single-family homes. If you've ever watched those old sitcoms with picture-perfect lawns and neat sidewalks, you can imagine what my neighborhood looks like: white picket fences, though some residents have swapped them for modern metal ones, carefully trimmed hedges, and at least one or two gleaming SUVs parked in every driveway. All told, it's the kind of place you'd expect people to mind their own business, or so I thought. My house stands out in a small, personal way. While it mostly fits the neighborhood's aesthetic, I've gradually made a few modifications that reflect my personality. Freshly painted shutters in a slightly darker shade, hanging plants near the front porch, and a well-tended flower bed that greets visitors whenever they walk up to my door. Before the gate fiasco, these minor changes had gone unnoticed or, at worst, garnered a polite comment from a neighbor. No big deal. I always made sure any updates aligned with the existing community rules, especially after hearing cautionary tales about draconian HOAs in other places. For the first 3 years, our HOA was relatively calm. If someone's lawn grew too tall, they might get a gentle reminder. If a home's exterior paint was chipping, they'd receive a polite suggestion to spruce it up before the next season. Nothing about the homeowners association felt oppressive. Sure, the board members weren't exactly the friendliest bunch on the planet, but they mostly kept to themselves. Then, about a year and a half ago, Maria took charge, and let me tell you, once Maria became HOA president, the entire vibe shifted. Maria is intense. At first, she came across as someone who had a sincere desire to keep our little corner of suburbia looking its best. She'd mention property values and community standards, and it sounded reasonable. Who doesn't want to maintain a nice neighborhood? But over time, her approach became much less neighborly and a whole lot more dictatorial. The shift was gradual. More and more neighbors started whispering about warnings and fines for seemingly trivial offenses like having a trash bin in view from the street for too long or planting a flower type that wasn't in the HOA's approved list. At first, I avoided any run-ins with Maria. I didn't have the time or energy to get involved in neighborhood politics. I just wanted to tend my little garden, enjoy my coffee on the porch, and maybe wave at a few neighbors here and there. But trouble has a way of finding you when you least expect it, especially when you're dealing with someone like Maria. It all started with a notice taped to my front door one chilly morning. "Your front gate is non-compliant with community standards," it read. I stared at the piece of paper in disbelief. My gate? The one I installed 3 years ago without so much as a raised eyebrow from the HOA? How could it suddenly be a problem? I took a step back and examined the gate, which was painted a soft blue and featured a small decorative iron swirl near the top. It wasn't flashy or offensive. If anything, it added a bit of charm to the otherwise cookie-cutter neighborhood. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was a mistake. I wasn't about to lose sleep over a piece of paper. But Maria was relentless. Within a week, I received a second notice, this one more strongly worded. By the third notice, she had included a warning about possible fines. And that's when I knew I couldn't ignore the situation anymore. I decided to confront Maria directly. The next day, I found her outside her house, clipboard in hand, meticulously jotting notes as she inspected another neighbor's driveway. "Maria," I called, forcing a polite smile. She turned, eyes narrowing slightly as she registered who I was. "We need to talk about the gate notices." Maria didn't mince words. "Your gate doesn't meet the uniform aesthetic standards we're implementing across the neighborhood," she said flatly. "You'll need to replace it or face a fine." I felt my temper rise but tried to keep my tone measured. "Maria, that gate has been there for years. It's not an eyesore, and no one has ever complained before." She pursed her lips. "Standards change. And as head of the HOA, it's my responsibility to ensure compliance." Her tone was clipped, almost robotic, and I realized there would be no reasoning with her. "Fine," I said, barely keeping my frustration in check. "I'll take it up with the HOA board." Her smile was small and smug. "You're welcome to try. But as you know, I have the final say." With that, she turned back to her clipboard, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a gnat buzzing around her ears. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maria's smug expression and heard the condescending lilt in her voice. I knew I should let it go. After all, it was just a gate, but something inside me snapped. I was done being pushed around. The next morning, I woke up determined. I gathered every document, every email, and every letter I had ever received from the HOA. If Maria was going to come after me, I'd be ready. I spent hours poring over the fine print, hunting for any inconsistencies. And there it was, a clause buried deep within the HOA charter that Maria had either overlooked or chosen to ignore. It explicitly allowed existing structures to remain, provided they were not in disrepair. Armed with my discovery, I called an emergency HOA meeting. Maria's eyes widened when she saw me standing at the front of the community hall, a stack of papers in my hands. "This meeting is unauthorized," she barked. "Actually," I said with a calm I didn't feel, "the charter allows any member to request a meeting if they believe there's been a breach of the bylaws." I turned to the small crowd that had gathered. "Maria's been making demands that don't align with our HOA's rules. And I have proof." For the first time, Maria looked rattled. "You don't understand." "What I understand," I interrupted, "is that we all want to live in a community where everyone is treated fairly." I held up the documents for all to see. "My gate stays. And if anyone else has felt unfairly targeted, now's the time to speak up." A few hands went up. Then more. The murmurs grew louder. Maria's reign was crumbling before our eyes. Finally, she grabbed her clipboard and stormed out. The crowd erupted in cheers. That night, I stood by my gate, staring out at the stars. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt peaceful. And as the cool breeze swept through, I knew one thing for certain: Maria would never cross me again.